Welcome to the second video on making our little race car. And we're going to be doing our video today on using the Tenon saw. So we're going to be going through lots of different things on how to look at and select your Tenon saw, how to hold your materials, how to cut, where to place your saw, etc. on doing so. Okay, to start with here, I'm going to just explain briefly about why the next step is a Tenon saw and what you should have done before you get to this step. So hopefully you've got all your material nicely marked out, and I recommend that you get your teacher to check this before you go any further. You might not have all of your marking out done just yet, and that's okay. You might just have your 3 trenches marked out. That's the bare minimum before you get to the point where you can do any cutting. As I said, have your teacher check that, make sure it's going okay before you start making anything you can't change. Now when we go to having something like a trench, okay, where there's a material we need to remove but we don't want to cut all the way through our timber. Before we can chisel any of that out, we need to actually cut down the sides of the trenches first. And this is super important. We don't do this, put our chisel on there, hit that with our mallet to get the chisel to take it away, and it's going to split the whole way along the grain there, okay? So in order to stop that from happening, we do want it to split, to chip away, but we want it to stop where our lines are. So we have to cut down those lines first with our Tenon saw so that when we do chisel it out, it doesn't split our timber all the way along. Okay? So some of the techniques that I'm going to be showing you are generic to using the Tenon saw for cutting all the way through your timber as well, but you're also going to be able to learn how to do it for when you want to stop at a certain point. Okay, now I'm going to start with the main trench here first, okay, and then I'll go to putting this in the vise to show you how to do these other ones. Alrighty, so first things first, we've got to have our Tenon saw. This is our Tenon saw. I like to look down the blade a little bit and see if there's any obvious damage down the blade when I pick one out of the rack. I'm looking for anything where there's this one tooth pointing well away from the rest of them, or any kind of a wavy or kink in my blade. If I have any of those things, then I put the blade back, the saw back, and I look for another one. Okay, so I want to make sure it's nice and neat. Okay, a little bit of a look on the Tenon saw. You can see with our Tenon saw, it's got reasonably fine teeth, and the teeth are pointing forwards, so that when we push forwards, it'll cut, but it won't cut on the backstroke. Okay, so that's pretty important to remember. Now for holding my saw, in my dominant hand, so I'm left-handed, so I'm holding it in my dominant hand here. Okay, I've got 3 fingers through that hole, my thumb wrapped around it nicely like that, and my pointer finger holding that blade nice and straight. This is really important. If you want a nice straight cut, you want to ever be able to make nice straight cuts, you must remember to put this finger pointing out. Okay? Must remember that one. And that is how you're going to hold your saw when you're cutting. Your other hand, that holds your material. Okay? Even if it's clamped in something, that still rests on your material. Normally you'll use something like the side of your thumb. Okay, if I just change hands for that a minute, might use something like the side of my thumb or my knuckle to rest that against, for making sure I'm in the right spot when I don't have a bench hook set up for me. So when I'm in the vise, that becomes really important. Okay, when I'm holding on my block here, it's not as important because the side of the block here forms part of that for me, that does that job for me. Okay. So as I mentioned, I do have my bench hook here, and I've got my bench hook here set up for left-handed cutting. If you're a right-hander, you just turn it over and you hook that underside there on the edge of the bench, and that's now set up for right-handed cutting. Okay? Now it's really important how you stand, and you must stand when you're cutting with a Tenon saw. You must stand up. Okay, so if I'm right-handed, I have got my left leg forwards, my right leg back, and I'm nice and sturdy because of this. If I'm left-handed, it's the opposite. My right foot is forward, my left foot is back a little bit. They're about shoulder width apart in the process of doing this. They're not super skinny together. slightly further apart, and again, gives me a nice amount of stability to do my cutting. Okay, so I've got my material here, it says all matter, as I've said. Okay, when I am looking for where to place my blade on my timber for cutting, one of the things I need to look out for is I want to always cut in the waist. Okay, so if we have a look at our material here, I can put my blade, try and get that on the camera for you. If I put it on the line, I'm going to lose material on either side of my line. And if I need this to be an exact size, that's not going to work out for me. If I put it in here somewhere, I'm not going to be able to remove a lot of that waste that I need to remove. So where I want to place it is as close to my line as I can, but while still being in the waist section. Okay? It's still definitely being to the side of our line. So I'm going to place it on my bench hook with my saw against that side face there. Okay, and then move. You can see how my hand is holding down. Okay, I've got my pointer finger on top there holding it down. My thumb and pointer finger can move it around, and the rest of my fingers are sitting on top there and can come over there and clamp that in if needed. Okay, but until then, I just want to kind of, look for getting that in the right spot. Okay, so I've got that in the right spot. I'm holding that in there nicely now. To start my cut, I'm going to go backwards a couple of times. Now you can see that while I'm doing this, I've got this end here lower than the back end of my blade. Okay, and what you can't see because of the angle is I'm looking over the top of my saw to make sure that my saw is relatively straight to my line. Okay, so a couple of back cuts there. And I'm just looking for this kind of groove. Okay, just enough of a groove that's going to hold my saw when I try to cut forwards. Okay, so you don't need to pick yours up, I just wanted to show you that. Once I've got that going, I can start cutting forwards. Now I want to use as much of the length of my saw as possible. I'm going to keep this end here as low as possible until I reach my line. Now if you were cutting all the way through, you're just going to keep that lower than this back end here. It doesn't matter if you cut through this while you're doing this. Okay, this is here to help provide support so we don't get chipping out when you do cut all the way through. But it doesn't matter if you start cutting through it. These, we replace these every now and again when they start to get too worn away. As I'm cutting, again, I'm looking over the top of my blade to make sure that I'm not crossing over my line still. Okay, now I'm just going to stop and check. See how I'm going? There you go. I'm pretty much at my line there, but I'm not quite at the bottom of my line on that side there. So I want to try and level out my saw a bit more now. Cut that. I don't want to rock it though. I don't want to have this end now lower and that end up higher because I'll end up with a bit in the middle that's not cut all the way through. Okay, so I want that to be nice and level. And there you can see I've now stopped at my line on that side there, at my line on that side there, and I've got nice and close to my marking out line. Okay, so you repeat the same thing on this side here, except that you're inside the waist. Okay, so there's my groove going again there, inside the waist. Check, see how I'm going, go a little bit further through. Still a little further. Okay, pretty good. I'm going to level it out now. And there we go. As you can see, both cuts are nicely within the waist section and are just down to my lines. And I had that pointer finger pointing out there, so they're nice and straight cuts as well. Okay, so moving on now to doing our other cuts. At this point, you can just chisel this out. Okay, you can stop and put the chisel on here and watch the video for learning how to do that. And then come back and cut this again afterwards if you like. But you're here, you may as well do all of them. Okay, so for this one we're going to set it up in a vise. Okay, I just want to jump in here quickly and explain to you, sorry about that, explain to you the reason why we moved from the bench hook to the vise. Okay, the bench hook allows you to cut all the way through your material. But because we are cutting only a little bit down, and I can't, thin, relatively tall, yeah? So it's at least twice the thickness high. So putting that against my bench hook, it's gonna try and wobble like this, okay? So I can secure it in the vise because I'm not cutting all the way through. I'm only cutting a little way down, and that means it's not gonna wobble all over the place. Now, if I needed to cut all the way through something, I'm not going to do it when it's sitting up like this. I'm going to sit it like that to cut through it, okay? So that's why we moved from the bench hook to the vise. It actually doesn't matter if the material is thicker than the height of this block here, okay? Provided that it's lying as flat as it can. If it's up like this, it's going to be problematic, okay? Especially when the thickness of it is only half of the width there or less. Now I want to have my material about halfway in my vise because I can, and if I can get this close, I'm just going to check that that shows up nicely. No, I'm going to move that across for you guys. Try and have it in the middle of your vise because it will clamp it better for you. Okay, and relatively parallel to the workbench. Okay, so now that I've got this in here, I don't have this side bit on my bench hook to help me, so I'm going to use my thumb, okay, either my nail on my thumb to help rest the blade against to keep it in the right spot, or my knuckle to rest it in the right spot, okay, whatever I feel most comfortable with doing. Okay, there we go, so that's going to be the side of my fingernail there, the back of my fingernail. Again, back cuts here. This is quite shallow, so I do need to be very careful that I don't cut further than my line for this one. Once I've got my back cuts done, okay, I'll just do a little bit more. Okay, you can get that feel. You can see where I go, oh, that's kind of gripping a bit too much, okay? So I'm just going to back off a little bit with that. If you do find that your saw is sticking in like this, you're probably pushing down too hard. It's one of the reasons why you never have your hand on the top there, because it's just going to jam in your wood. Okay, and to get rid of that, the only way to get rid of it is to really lightly rub that saw across the top until you get rid of those ridges, and then you can actually take some serious cuts again. So if you're finding it's gripping, you might just be pushing a little too hard. Okay, so there we go, that didn't take long for that one there. I'm going to do this one here again. So as I'm going on making my grooves, remember, front of this blade is lower than the back, doing my back cuts there, and I'm looking over the top to make sure it's in line with my line. Okay, and you can see that I'm not just going hell for leather, I am keeping track of where I'm up to with my cuts. Okay, now I could go again in the middle if I wasn't sure if I'd have a wide enough chisel to get through it. Otherwise, turn it over, do the same thing on that side there so that you have all of your cuts done, ready for chiseling. Okay, at the end of this, don't forget to put your saw back on the rack nice and carefully. Okay, and to sweep down your bench of any sawdust. Alrighty, keep it nice and clean for the next people. Alright, so that is using your tenon saw. Okay, nice and really useful skill to have. And the more that you do it, the better you're going to get at it. Okay, alrighty, I'll see you in class.